The murder of Charlie Kirk is just the latest example of modern American political violence that spans decades. The 1960s, of course, were one of the most turbulent decades in U.S. history, marked with political unrest and over civil rights issues and anti-war movements. It also saw several high-profile assassinations, with the murders of Medgar Evers, President John F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and Robert F. Kennedy, all in a span of just 5 years. While violent political activism gradually decreased through the 1970s, there were still some acts of political violence. President Gerald Ford was targeted with 2 assassination attempts in 1975 over a span of just 17 days. Ford escaped both incidents unharmed. 6 years later, President Ronald Reagan survived an assassination attempt as he was leaving a hotel in Washington, D.C. A bullet fired at the president ricocheted off of his limousine and then struck him under his left armpit. Reagan had to undergo emergency surgery, and he spent 12 days recovering in a hospital.
Wow. The 1980s and 90s saw a rise of militias, white supremacist groups, and anti-government extremists, punctuated by the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah building in Oklahoma City by Timothy McVeigh. 169 people were killed, nearly 700 others injured, making it the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in U.S. history. More recently, we've seen attacks on political figures from both sides of the aisle. In 2011, then Democratic Congresswoman Gabby Giffords was shot during a meeting with constituents. In 2017, Republican Congressman Steve Scalise was shot during a practice for the congressional softball game. In 2020, several men plotted to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. In 2022, Paul Pelosi, the husband of then U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, was attacked inside their home by an intruder armed with a hammer. Last year, there were 2 more attempts on President Trump's life, one at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, and another outside a golf course in Florida. Earlier this year, a man set fire to the home of Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro while the governor and his family were sleeping inside. And then the most recent attack prior to Kirk's murder. Minnesota State Representative Melissa Hortman was assassinated at her home. Another state lawmaker was shot at his home, and he survived. Last year, more than 9,400 direct threats were made against members of Congress, their families and staff, and the Capitol complex. According to the U.S. Capitol Police, that is more than double the number in 2017. By the end of this calendar year, Capitol Police said it is on track to work through 14,000 threat assessment cases involving lawmakers, Jonathan.
Yeah, meanwhile, serious threats against federal judges are also on the rise, with more than 800 incidents last year. According to the U.S. Marshals, that's nearly 4 times as many as there were back in 2021. This year, we've also seen anti-Semitic violence, with a Molotov cocktail thrown at demonstrators in Boulder, Colorado, who were marching in support of the Israeli hostages held by Hamas. And of course, there were those murders of 2 staff members of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. last month, who were gunned down outside a Jewish museum. Social media is seen as a key factor in accelerating political extremism, something the previous eras, of course, did not have. The platforms give the average person the ability to easily broadcast their views to large audiences worldwide, creating a technological shift that has led to more intense polarization while stripping public discourse of context and nuance. With us, we have Politics Bureau Chief and Senior Political Columnist at Politico, Jonathan Martin, Politics Reporter for Semivore, Dave Weigel, and Reverend Al Sharpton is back with us as well. J. Mart, I'll start with you here in this culture of political violence. That's a lengthy list certainly predates this modern era, but has accelerated in recent decades. We should also include, of course, the storming of the Capitol on January 6th.
Exactly.
It seems that the political temperature only has gotten hotter. And right now, the President of the United States seems more interested, as you have written, in catering to his base than trying to be a unifier for the whole country.
Yeah, I mean, which is probably the least surprising element of this. That's never been his political identity. He's somebody who has never pretended to be anything but the president of sort of his faction. Somebody who cares chiefly about his base. That's been the case for really 10 years now. But listen to that long roster of political violence in this country. I think about the history of violence in America generally. We are a violent country. That's been the case since the founding of America. But there's no question that the changes in technology have made this easier and more tempting. And I think about the Unabomber, for example. Don't forget, right? He had those chicken scrawls. He was up, hiding out in the mountains. He was somebody who's was not able to broadcast his views online, right? And now you've got a series of younger men, almost entirely men, between the ages of 16 and 30, who are living online, who are getting radicalized online, and are trying to impress others online by committing these heinous acts. And what I worry about, John, is by the time Congress gets around to trying to address this kind of challenge by looking at the algorithms, for example, it's going to be years, and we're going to be on to the next thing. And the algorithm issue is going to seem quaint by comparison when we're talking about deep fakes.
Yeah, and Charlie Warzel of The Atlantic has written really powerfully about the social media online ecosystem that exists that has motivated school shooters. And also now it seems like perhaps political assassins, where they can find like-minded travelers who goad each other on into these terrible acts of violence. And Dave Weigel, that's perhaps the dark corners of the internet, but more immediately is the social media feeds that we all see, that on Wednesday played unrelenting autoplay of gruesome footage of Kirk's assassination. And now we have the owner of that site, among just one of many prominent right-wing voices, blaming the political left for something that, frankly, the investigation is still very much in its early stages. There's a lot we don't know. Governor of Utah himself said as much. And yet it seems like there's this rush to judgment, just both sides of the aisle pointing fingers, and particularly the right trying to blame the left.
That began, as you were saying, before we knew anything about the shooter's ideology whatsoever. The same thing happened after the Minnesota shooting. There was an effort to be based on some papers that were found in the shooter's car, the suspect's car, to say this must be the far left at it again. And so one thing you can predict after a tragedy, after an assassination, are people who have some idea of what they want to do with power or how to attain more power going for it. That's been happening over the past week, of people who were saying to honor, including Stephen Miller in the administration, a lot of people in the administration saying it's time now to crack down on far left organizations. Not that we have a connection that we've proven, but from one group of donors, one think tank, to what this shooter saw, it can be a little preposterous, the connection between something a Democrat said in a speech 5 years ago and the idea that a shooter was inspired by that. But you're going to see that already. And when it comes to social media, following what John was saying, TikTok is still operating in this country despite a ban. The administration has not shown a willingness to crack down on social media. It has shown a willingness to crack down on the political left.
Reverend Al, you certainly know about political violence. You were stabbed. Somebody tried to kill you. I'm curious, as we look through this long list, and again, predating when Donald Trump was president of the United States, whether you look at the attack of Steve Scalise or whether you look at all the other things that have happened, the assassinations of a Minnesota lawmaker and her husband in their homes just this past summer, the attempted assassinations of Donald Trump, and of course we have Charlie Cook, Governor Shapiro, what's that?
Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, Charlie Kirk, Governor Shapiro, of course, the attempted arson, and the person who said they wanted to get him with a hammer. Of course, the attacks on Paul Pelosi, and all the anti-Semitic attacks. It just keeps going around and around. As somebody who has been attacked, I'm really curious what your thoughts are this morning.
My thoughts are that responsible leadership and influencers on both sides need to really come together and appeal to whoever they influence that we cannot continue this whole level of violence and normalizing political attacks. When I was stabbed leading a nonviolent march about racism, the first thing I thought about, even before we found out how serious the wound was, as I was laying in the hospital with oxygen mask, is I don't want to be remembered for causing violence or retribution. And I think that we need to be careful not to have people in the name of either side, Democrats or Republicans, be remembered as those that got the upper hand in a confrontation rather than saying, wait a minute, we don't need to normalize this. And I think that that is going to be the challenge over the next few days as we see these ramp-ups about blaming left-wing organizations or left-wing thought when we don't know that any more than it would be right if it was the other way around. I was happy to see Kirk's widow talk about religion and faith and not really take that kind of point. I would hope the president and others that speak at the memorial services and rallies in the next coming days think about how they could use this as a moment to step to a higher moral ground. And we can debate not viciously, but vehemently on our political differences, but not do it with violence or even the suggestions of violence.
As Dave said.